movies presented in this episode of Smash TV are utter trash, not because they are bad. No, it's simply because of the subject matter, garbage and whatever is in them. Icky, nasty, smelly stuff, with bugs and slime and all kinds of nasty stuff that would make me vomit. You see, I'm not really good with certain types of smell, and don't get me started about poo-poo. No sir, Robotron don't need no smelly stuff near his nostrils. These movies, however, this is the 69th episode of Smash TV. I guess I had to do something sexy for this, but I guess I had enough sex comedy episodes already. 30 Years of Garbage Pail Kids is a crowd-funded documentary on the making of the infamous trading cards called the Garbage Pail Kids. If you do not know what those are, then do watch other parts of this video, or for the TikTok people, other videos explaining it all. In this not as annoying as other documentaries, we of course start from the beginning, the idea and where it came from, then towards the art and the people who create that art, the environment they came from, the launch, the success and beyond. We address the lawsuit of the company that invented Cabbage Patch dolls, of which the Garbage Pail Kids are a parody, their own lawsuit for being a derivative product, and the fact copyright laws are a chaotic bunch of rules only meant to give money to the wrong people. We also discuss the misappropriation of all the profits from the cards and merchandising, making the fat cats fatter and the artists still fairly poor. And we of course talk about the animated series and the movie and what came after the sudden decline in popularity. The interviews are competent and interesting enough, though the cameraman for some reason is often too late with his focus and you'll see him moving in frame while the interviewee is already talking. There's some nice punk music to fuel that nostalgia, and a whole bunch of people who of course have more GPK cards and goodies than I could ever have dreamt to have. Cause yes, I have series 1 and 2 and beyond too. Probably fairly mint, so maybe one day my kids can retire from these. 30 Years of Garbage Pail Kids is a great documentary for all of us who were and are fans and are nostalgic to the era. There's a slight current-day political scene in here about that oh-so-evil guy called Trump, but that's so short it can be easily discarded. GPK stood and stands above that in my opinion. It mocks all, not just one side, cause we are all garbage. Pail Kids. Smash that. Based on the extremely popular collectible cards from the 80s called the Garbage Pail Kids, a rock and punk parody of the Cabbage Patch dolls using all kinds of yucky, ugly and downright fun imagery, came thus one episode animated series. Well, kinda, since this series might have been made at the height of the GPK popularity in 1987, it was never broadcast or released to the public, until at least in 2006 when they released a DVD set with all the episodes, and boy, they should have released it back then. Every episode we follow several characters from the GPK series as they have all kinds of adventures and icky things that are happening to them. The animation is bad, the style of drawing isn't on par with the excellent art on the cards, and most of the jokes are too childish to be enjoyable by a robot as old as me. Nevertheless, it's GPK and it has some good moments. Each episode not only has 2 short tales but also fake product advertisements and a sort of asshole of the day where annoying types of kids or traits are mocked and ridiculed. All in all, if you're a fan of the Garbage Pail Kids, this is a must-see, simply for the fact that it exists. However great the GPK cards are, they dropped the all fleshing out the concept of these little buggers appearing in real life, though in fairness they did a whole lot better than the people who created the movie. After seeing the documentary, which I will also review later, it's sad to know that the creator of the Ren and Stimpy show had an idea to make a GPK cartoon in his style, and boy did that look great. Alas, we got this instead. Until they decide to reboot it and hopefully not slightly fuck it up again. Check that. Garbage Pail Kids the movie was a movie I'd have sworn I'd seen during my childhood years. I distinctly remember my parents renting the VHS on the fabulous video box and having it lying on our coffee table. In retrospect, after rewatching this film, it's clear that I never saw this movie at all. Regardless, Garbage Pail Kids. The movie is the live-action film based on the popular cards from the 80s depicting all kinds of icky, nasty, slimy parodies of people and names, and oh boy did the writers and director not give a single fuck about figuring out something interesting to do with the plot. Hey, these ugly kids with nasty habits, let's just have them be like gremlins, but also let them have them like, I don't know, maybe clothes. And let's have them make clothes for a teenage boy who wants to impress a girl who's probably a tween. And while we're at it, let's have that tween just go with it and seduce the kid. It's only a couple of years difference, am I right? Sure, no problem with a horny teen lusting for a woman. We've all been there. But the reverse is a little bit questionable. But maybe he's 15 and she's 17 and looks older. That still works in that age bracket. Anyways, Garbage Pail Kids. Awesome characters. Cabbage Patch Kids, and what do we get? These. I mean, couldn't make it look a little bit like this, or even this? Guess not. I've read everywhere that this is a nasty film, with disgusting stuff. Most disgusting film I've ever seen, they say. Well, Robotron don't really use hyperboles, I just say how it is. And this movie definitely has snot and vomit and an excessive amount of peeing your pants joke, but most horror films are way more gross than this, with puss, blood, slime, vomit, the works. Hell, Monty Python's vomit scene is unbearable to watch. All we get in GPK isn't even as bad as the scene from The Exorcist. I don't know why people and reviewers do this, but hey, they have millions of subs queues. They use these hyperboles to attract the clickbait craving masses. Robotron is spitting it real, yo. Word up, dog. Anyways, GPK isn't even the worst movie ever made. It's just boring, void of creativity, lame comedy-wise, and completely absent of the coolness factor that the cards were. Cards designed and drawn by artistic people like Art Spiegelman, John Pound, James Warhola and others. Imagine if you want a movie where the GPK kids are a bit like Chucky but less violent, and instead of killing everyone, just wreaking havoc and mayhem everywhere. It needs some work, but already 1,000 times more potential than what these peeps thought up. A shame, really. But that's greedy and dumb corporations for ya. Check that. Return of the Swamp Thing is the sequel to the 1982's movie Swamp Thing, which was a comic book adaptation before Kevin Feige farted out his master plan for the MCU, which inevitably will lead to his downfall with the MCU. To the people who have seen the excellent and prematurely cancelled Swamp Thing series, the story will feel very familiar. After her mom's death, a blonde bombshell, played by young Heather Locklear, travels to the Floridian swamp land to confront her evil stepfather. This stepfather is doing evil experiments in the swamp in order to gain immortality. These experiments caused a doctor to mutate into a green plant-like monster called Swamp Thing in the previous film. This monster, the bombshell, and the evil stepfather and his cronies bump into each other and bump heads. And that's about it. Swamp Thing was a fairly dark but straightforward comic book adaptation. It was mixed action, mixed horror, but ultimately was too low budget to be impressive. The sequel is much more comedic in nature and makes it all feel a bit like a rockery. The prosthetics used to create Swamp Thing are a little bit better, but they rarely achieve a quality that surpasses the toxic Avenger prosthetics from the Trauma movies. As for the acting, it's pretty much take it or leave it, and there's no real notion of special effects or spectacular action. It's low budget and it's cheesy, and it doesn't really offer much you wouldn't get in the previously mentioned Swamp Thing TV series. So do yourself a favor and go watch that instead. And maybe someday the idiots in charge will decide to make a new series, but they'd probably screw it up again as usual. Check that. The Last Temptation of Toxie is the third toxic Avenger film about a very nerdy guy who was thrown in a vat of radioactive waste and became the Toxic Avenger, a violent, disgusting superhero who fights evil in the city of Tromaville. After the success of the previous two movies and Toxie's superhero skills, Tromaville has become so peaceful Toxie has nothing to do, and so he goes in search of a job. Wouldn't you know that he gets hired by the most evil man in town, and beyond and becomes a force of evil. Toxic Avenger 3 is very much more of the same and offers about the same amount of gore, violence, disgusting jokes, and everything else you expect from a trauma film, and sex and big whopping dangling titties of course, though most are connected to females of the not so attractive persuasion, at least in the movie because it's so disgustingly presented. Much like its predecessors, Toxic Avenger 3 is low-budget B-movie trash and you should know exactly what you're getting into. If you don't, then go watch the first one and decide for yourself. The trauma movies are quite unique and difficult to anything I'm unable to come up with at the moment. If you didn't like trauma or Toxie before, then this won't change your mind either. Check that. Citizen Toxic. The Toxic Avenger 4 is the fourth Toxic Avenger movie, directed by Lloyd Kaufman, the mutated nerd turned radioactive monster and superhero. Toxic Avenger returns to save Tromaville from evil when a gang of diaper-wearing misfits take the retards in the Tromaville school for the very special are taken hostage. Toxic Avenger shows up to save the day. Unfortunately, he cannot save everyone, and when an explosion created a dimensional rift, our Toxie finds himself in the mirror universe version of Tromaville. To make things more complicated, his evil counterpart, without goatee by the way, gets catapulted to Tromaville and starts taking over. Our kind-hearted Toxie, however, remains confused in a violent and dire version of his once beloved world. Toxic 4, in my opinion, is the best film since the first Toxic Avenger. It's over the top, the humor hits, it's unapologetic, gory, nasty and sexy at the same time. There's blood, boobs, bikinis, bile, butts, balls, and are probably some other B's in this very B movie. Toxic Avenger is an 80s cult classic, and with this film it has solidly arrived in the 2000s. All hail Toxic Avenger and his perky blind wife. Check that. Return to Nuke'Em High Volume 1 is the first part of the sequel to the 1994's Nuke'Em High Trauma films. Being the third movie in the series, it was partially crowdfunded to achieve the long-awaited sequel to Nuke'Em High. We once again enter Trauma High, a high school where things aren't really like any other high school. The nuclear plant and its radioactive waste have been dealt with and replaced by the much more environmentally friendly Green and Healthy Food Corporation, who of course does everything to the book and doesn't care about profit at all. Like most corporations, this environmentally friendly goop mutates something, and that falls on a couple making passionate love. And then, well, you know, afterwards we meet a rich blonde hottie who gets bullied by a poor dark-haired hottie, and they start to form a bond which eventually goes places. Were it not for that darn mutative goo, a good that will affect multiple people, both hero and villain alike. Cue the typical trauma menu of gore, disgust, big titties, violence, comedy, sex, in-house references, parody and lesbian love. It's all very familiar, but it feels modern with modern film grain and surprisingly few nude actresses below 6. It also has cameos by both the late Lenny Kilminster from Motorhead and Stan Lee from Marvel comic fame, who was a good friend with Lloyd Kaufman for many years. Oh, and Playboy bunnies or whatever porn actresses do these days. What's more, this is one of those movies that's split in two, much like this review. Like and subscribe. Check that. Return to Nuke'Em High Volume 2 is the second part of the Return to Nuke'Em High movie. Apparently none other than Quentin Tarantino, who started this cut up the movie in pieces fad, told Lloyd Kaufman to do this, and since they had enough footage anyways, and wouldn't you know, I think Volume 2 is even better. Why? More of that trauma goodness and an extra amount of naked women, and a very friendly yet adventurous duck who becomes, well, even more than in the first volume. Since this review is cut up and we're talking about pretty much the same movie, I have to blab some more about it without repeating myself. Well, let's just say that I really enjoyed Return to Nuke'Em High Volume 1 and 2. Even more so than the first iteration, which was a bit loud for my taste. But many trauma films have the actors acting like shouting kids, cause they seem to think that since the movie is silly they will have to act over the top silly as well. Don't get me wrong, it's still silly, just not as loud as in the others. As for the rest, it's pretty neat. still politically incorrect despite the fact they were inclusive with their lesbians. They even have, brace yourself, a black guy aptly named the black guy who acts, let's say, is pretty particular in the film, and it's delightful. You don't need to have seen the first two Nuke'Em High movies, and if you're new to Troma, I'd very much recommend watching these first. There's a little spoiler at the beginning, of course, to set the tone, but you're not watching Troma films for the plot, you're watching it for the experience. Smash that. Stuck on You is Troma's answer to all the sex comedies of the 80s about a young couple who go through the motions of a relationship, falling in love, banging a lot, living together. Stress due to work and life cause the slow separation, the increase in annoyance, and ultimately separation. And so we arrive with them at marriage counseling when an angel is sent from heaven to fix this unfortunate marriage. And he does this by showing the couple love through the ages. And that love, my dear subscribers and lurkers, can get very messy, very messy. There's some truly disgusting stuff in here. I particularly remember the dinner scene being the worst, but maybe your mileage will vary. This isn't your typical romantic story, as you could probably guess, but I do think it's, in a sick way, a good movie to watch with whatever floozy you're sitting on your sofa with. Relationships are a complicated thing, and in these days of my life is my own apostrophe and the gradual destruction of the nuclear family, a lot of people won't even get into one. Maybe, somehow, this little film will help somewhere in realizing that one needs to work to build something good. And if this film doesn't help, then you at least saw something funny, disgusting, and quite weird. Weird like a Troma movie. Check it out. Check that. Meet the Feebles is a 1989 movie with puppets that do everything that the Muppets wouldn't do. Sex, violence, drugs, nasty diseases, alcoholism, rape, simply every bad thing that you can imagine. For shock value, you know, because by 1989 we were used to the family-friendly Muppets that it needed a counter. And who better to counter it than Peter Lord of the Rings Jackson, who by then was pretty much only known for bad taste. And so we follow a large bunch of animals who are, like the Muppets, part of show business. And instead of dance and singing, although there is a little of that, we get to experience the seedy underbelly of show business. We follow the abusive manager who likes to fuck starlets. We have the has-been star who gained a few years and pounds. We have the young wannabe actor who is too shy and falls for the hot poodle. There's rabbit orgies and sleazy wires leaking come out of their snouts. We have rats, crocodiles, fish, and other cast that all get a bum rep at one point in the movie. Yup, it's pretty out there. Technically it's not a true puppet movie like the Muppets, though. Some characters are just people dressed up as Muppets, which places them firmly in the furry category. Oh dear, furries. Well, I guess they didn't exist in 1989 yet, so we're pretty safe there. It's all pretty much shock value, to be honest, although there is a story there. I got pretty bored with it halfway through, as it was one scene after the other that had something nasty to it. I guess I'm a little too old for this kind of movie. This would have been great in the 90s when people mentioned it to be, but I never got to it in that time, seeing I was doing other things and watching other movies. The movie picks up again when a certain character decides it had enough, and what follows then is pretty glorious. The end credits are also pretty funny for the short period it lasts. So yeah, Meet the Feebles is best viewed in your teens, when your mind is fresh and filth can still make you either laugh or shocked. People who have seen a little bit in life will maybe appreciate the Muppet parody, but even then, Muppets were good wholesome characters, and that type of character doesn't really exist anymore. At least not in today's media. There's room for both though. Check it out and make up your own mind. A Broken Bar. Check that.